Welcome back, everybody. Episode 16 of Just Conversations, solution-focused communication with the goal of informing systemic change. And as always, my next guest needs no introduction. Over to you, Natalia.
Thanks so much, Dean. So I'm Natalia Krysiak. I run an organization called Cities for Play, which aims to create more playful and child-friendly cities. And we do that through design, through consultancy, but also through advocacy, trying to advocate for this idea that if we design more playful and more child-friendly cities, they'll be great not only for our younger citizens, but for all of us.
Yeah, cool. And so just to touch back on that, that's how we connected at the Opera House, solving big problems, or I can't remember the exact name of that, but met you just were at the time that you'd finish your fellowship, but building as in constructing and designing safer communities is something that piqued my interest, and had a really good conversation with you, passionate about the work you do. So on that, construction design, where does that sit? And when it feels strange that you have to advocate for these things, but where are you getting the free, like, where's the pushback in, like, oh, we can build 25 buildings here, but it's better and safer for the community if we build 10? What does that look like as a design construction?
Yeah, there's always the tension between what the designer and what the community might want versus what's viable from a building perspective, from a profitability perspective for the developer, etc. But what I discovered very early on in my career is that during those initial discussions between designers, planners, communities, and developers, that there were only certain voices that were present within that conversation. And it was sort of a very small group of people, usually the people that have a lot of time on their hands, and often a lot of privilege to be able to use their time in that way to advocate for their own needs. Some of the user groups that I found were really lacking within those conversations were the people who don't have often the resources or time to be there. And that often involves parents of children and, of course, children themselves who are not even invited to these sorts of conversations often. So what I started realizing is that even though, these conflicts can be resolved between developers and communities, you do need the right voices in the room in the first place in order to understand everybody's needs. Otherwise, you're sort of just designing for the same type of person over and over again. And essentially, you're missing the needs of a big demographic and a big user group if you're doing that. So, yeah, so those conflicts will always be there, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But we need the right people in the room to be able to negotiate those conflicts to really solve communities for the best use of everyone.
Yeah, and you've opened my mind just saying that. I wouldn't have even thought about children and consulting them on certain things around, like, I'm going to build a building. Why would a kid want to have a say in that? Like, why should they have a say in that? However, that all inclusive, that understanding and comprehension moving forward, in my opinion, we're undergoing an innovative evolution at the moment. Everything is just at our fingertips with a rapid pace. Technology is like, I don't think we as humans quite understand its capability at the moment of what we can do. So just for the longevity of those things, if you're getting children involved, I would see that as a really sort of powerful longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. Technology and sort of innovation can play a huge role in allowing those sort of traditionally people that have less of a voice in the design and planning of our cities to actually come forward and have a higher voice. I mean, there's a beautiful app that is from Finland. It's called the Secret Agent app. And so what they do is they encourage children to use this app to be sort of a secret agent and identify issues within their community that might make them feel unsafe
Wow.
or that they would like to change. So they sort of take on a persona, so it's a really playful way of doing it. And so they might start tagging on within their neighborhood, there's heaps of rubbish in this area, so we really need to clean it up. This street makes me feel really unsafe. I'm not able to cross it on my own. So they start having a real impact on their communities through technology. So they might not be physically able to be present during those large boardroom conversations that planners have with developers, but they can contribute through technology. I think that's a really interesting way to get communities involved, to have a voice in the design of our cities.
Oh, definitely. And it's so, well, kids are so good at that. They're so good at understanding and, lack of preconceived ideas and all of that sort of stuff. It's a really, it really interests me.
Yeah.
The complexity of the housing crisis, obviously, that we've got in Australia. So understanding, like, well, the red tape is the main thing, I believe. We've got enough land, I know that much, to build houses. But so is there the capacity to build out that way, infrastructure wise? Like, could we go, what would a new city look like if you build it? Let's say that.
Yeah, I think
With a childlike mind.
yeah, I mean, in my opinion, there's a lot of push, or a lot of sort of background noise around housing, and this idea that we have, or this perception that we have, that as soon as you have a child, you move out of the city and into further away areas where you have more space. The reality of that is that many young people don't want to do that. They want to be close to where they work. They want to have access to public transport. They want to be within higher, more vibrant communities, higher density, more vibrant communities where they can access services, restaurants, cultural institutions, high quality parks, etc., etc. But there hasn't been a focus on that demographic within the design of cities, which means that by default, we're pushing those communities further out of the cities where they have less access to that sort of infrastructure. And arguably, these are the people that need that sort of infrastructure most. So what's to me the most obvious evolution of that is that in the apartment design guide, for example, there's no reference to how we might design a family-friendly apartment layout. Same in our urban design guidelines, there's very little focus on how you might design a child-friendly city. And this would involve things like thinking about how a child might safely walk or cycle to school on their own, how they might play outside on their street, as we all did when we were young, how they might be able to walk within a really short radius to a moment of play, how you might allow for young parents with babies to access services within their local communities, schools, childcare centres which are integrated within high density communities, and also thinking about what the alternative to a backyard might be within our urban setting. So is there a communal backyard type of arrangement that we could start thinking about? So all of these issues which can really elevate the livability of families with children within our cities, we're currently not really talking about. And the result of that is that families are consistently pushed out of the cities because cities are not designed for them or with them in mind. And that to me is a really easy way to flip that housing and affordability conversation also, because we know, of course, that a two-bedroom apartment versus a two-bedroom house is going to be cheaper. So living in higher density is good from a sustainability perspective. It's good from an economy perspective, but we just need to make sure that every demographic and every stage of life is integrated within that sort of vision of what a sustainable higher density city might look like.
Yeah, and I think, well, what I always get when talking to government and stuff like that is they want the panacea, they want the silver bullet. I just want something that works for the vast majority. And then sort of everything else is in the too hard basket. So that's, I'm not sure, and I don't assume anything. I'm not sure if you've ever been into a prison.
No.
So yeah, as you're aware, that was my fellowship
Yes.
study. But so looking at the design of a prison as an overall health perspective and well-being and safety, like I understand that they're designed to keep society safe and but just, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but just around if we build everything like that, it would be a very miserable sort of scenario. And where I'm getting to is, if we're building prisons and designing in that space, we're only doing more harm. Like it's hard to rehabilitate people in these harsh environments. Yes?
Mhm. Yeah. Do you think it's a lot to do with segregation also? So if prisons had an opportunity for them to be more integrated where viable, do you think that would be
Yeah,
a
there's
solution?
evidence to suggest that the greater the points of contact with the outside beyond the wall,
Right.
the less chance of returning to prison.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
really interesting. Yeah.
and they've built a rapid build prison. Oh, I can't even remember where it is, but it's a dorm. So it's 20 beds, and it's almost like, first class, sort of the beds, how they like that. So the beds are all
Mm,
stacked up together, and then they're all in one room. It's all open, and they have four or five showers and toilets. The lights are on till 10 o'clock at night, fluoro lights,
mm,
and then they go out into a communal area outside. But that has significantly reduced instances of violence
yeah. Yeah.
because they're always seen.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating connection, and I've never thought about that. I mean, obviously, your
Yeah,
research
why
is
would you? But
probably one of the one of the first in terms of making people think about these things. But I think what you're highlighting there, which is relevant to the design of cities generally, is this idea of connecting different types of communities together, different ages, different demographics, different economic situations between people. So making sure that we're not segregating. This is where the families with children live. This is where the elderly live.
yeah,
This is where the youth live. This is where we keep people, that have problems. It's more about understanding how we can create more of a weave, I guess, or a sort of a tapestry so
yeah,
that cities are
100%,
connected, and we can learn
100%.
from one another that way. And I think there's been some also interesting studies around when you start connecting the elderly people with young children,
Yeah,
how beneficial that is for the health and well-being of both children and the elderly. So it's sort of this same concept of why do we say this is the childcare centre and this is the aged care
yeah,
centre?
yeah,
Why can't they come together? Why can't we have synergies between these things, which we know are proven to have beneficial to everyone? So yeah, we do have this sort of slight obsession within city design of keeping things contained and
yes,
clean.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Which is
yeah, which
which children aren't contained and clean. Yeah,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
isolation, as you said, leads to loneliness. They say
Hmm.
that loneliness is the greatest killer throughout society, kills more
That's
people than
right.
anything. So yeah, like just around those designs and how we can bring people together instead of apart, and the myriad
Absolutely.
of people. But being a real
Absolutely.
estate agent, I used to manage two blocks of units, and there were 16 in each block. If you put all of one nationality in the block, it was horrendous. They'd all fight.
Mm.
But if you had a spattering of different cultures in there, everyone got on really well.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah. And just on your research, actually, I have a question for you also,
Yeah,
because I've read some research around play therapy. We know that play is hugely beneficial to children, but also to adults in terms of enhancing mental health outcomes and, of course, physical outcomes. And I have heard that play therapy in prisons can actually reverse criminal behaviors. I don't know whether you've come across any sort of play initiatives
I
within.
haven't come across play initiatives. I would agree on that theory. Um, I don't. So with a prison, what prison is designed for is punishment, which that's understood, but that's traumatizing. And if you
Mm,
understand how the brain works with trauma, fight, flight, freeze, and all of that sort of stuff, when people are being traumatized, they cannot integrate information because
mhm,
they're in like fight, flight, freeze, like it's a constant, they disassociate. So I don't subscribe to education in prisons. However, play therapy, play theory, psychosomatic stuff, so yoga, breath
mm,
work, definitely. That's what I would suggest would work well in those space, work well in any space. Um, Knowing and being a survivor of trauma, um, I'm at the stage now where I don't want to talk about it anymore. So the non-talking therapies, like the play therapy and all that sort of stuff. And I would suggest there is a vast amount of people incarcerated who are developmentally delayed as well, as in like the
mm,
mature level. So they're almost childlike. I always have said prison is full of scared little boys.
mm.
So yeah, I think there's definite scope for it.
Yeah,
Definite
it's
scope.
fascinating. I think, yeah, the power of play to heal people, but also to prevent certain behaviors in the first place. I mean, there's also really interesting studies around how the integration of play spaces within public areas
Yeah.
reduces the rate of crime also, because
Yeah.
when you see children around, when you see people being actively engaged in their communities, play through socialization, all of a sudden sort of that the criminal behaviors in those areas tend to go down. So I think it's a fascinating way of both healing but also preventing
Yeah.
certain behaviors.
Yeah. That is very interesting. Got me thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Who would have thought the connections between prisons
yeah,
and
I know.
child-friendly
Well, I
cities?
did. I sort of seen the connection from our conversation.
Mm,
Mainly just, yeah, mainly because you spoke about actually building, like constructing safer communities. And I was
yeah,
working in a space where people were like, oh, we want to create safer communities, but it was more around the behavior. I was like, well, the two things go sort of hand in hand, if you will. Like it's not, and this is what this
absolutely.
just conversations is about, is getting a myriad of people from a vast array of backgrounds to say, hey, there is a way we can all work together to look at solutions and connect the dots. So this is a really good opportunity if people listen to this, to
Yeah,
connect the dots, because this normally wouldn't be, people wouldn't normally think that I'll be talking. Are you an architect? I don't know your actual quality. So like, why is a guy from jail talking to an architect about safer communities?
yeah, yeah. I think it's
There's so
fascinating.
much more in common than not, I would think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think at the end of the day, the theory with child-friendly cities is that if you design a city which is safe enough for an 8-year-old child to be out on their own, chances are that you've covered
yeah,
everybody in between.
yeah,
You've covered the elderly person, you've covered the minority groups, you've covered sort of more or less everyone. If that's your there's a researcher called Tim Gill, and he calls children the indicator species. So
yeah,
if you can see children playing out on your street, it means that that's an indication that you've designed a safe community if a child is safe enough to be there on their own.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's sort of a sort of a indicator, like when you see fish in water, you know that
They're
it's a
healthy
fish
communities.
stream. It's a healthy
They're healthy
community.
communities,
Exactly.
and that's,
That's right.
oh, I can't remember what exactly was it you said before, but just around the inclusiveness and the participation in the sort of consultative process for the Sweden, did you say where the app was?
In Finland. Yeah.
Finland, sorry. So so what I'm trying to do is how can I incorporate humane practices
Mm,
into traumatic environments or environments
mm,
that are dangerous to increase instances of joy and hope.
mm,
So that's sort of how, that's where I've landed from all that I've sort of come back from my fellowship from. Because when I went to the Netherlands, I went into there was a forensic unit and then there was a prison. And the prison was just like, it was almost identical. It smelt the same. It looked the same. The cells were the same size. They had the same things in them that I had in my cell when I was at Silverwater. Like, it was almost, so that whole thing, I thought I was going to the Netherlands and it was going to be, oh, this is going to be a solution and blah, blah, blah. But it was like, no, they're just prisons. They're exactly the same. Even the way that they were designed out with like the guards in the middle and all out the wings. The only difference was they have a vastly greater humane approach. So my cell was mine. If an officer wants to come in, he knocks on the door. I can smoke in my cell, but I can't smoke in the public.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they didn't stop people from smoking. They said, if you want to smoke, you can smoke, but you're going to smoke in your cell.
Mm.
It was a choice thing. Over and above
Mm.
here, they stopped smoking and it created this false economy
Right.
where a pouch of tobacco was worth almost as much as like 5, 6, 10 grams of heroin.
Mm.
So just, they created their more problems by stopping it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So by giving people choice, you're all of a
Yeah.
sudden
Well, it's
enabling.
humane. It's dignity, treating people
Yeah.
with dignity. You're an adult. If we expect you to come out and participate in society, start
Mm.
making some healthy decisions and choices in your life, or start to
Yeah.
take some autonomy.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And something actually that reminds me of is something I observed in Japan when I was doing my Churchill fellowship. In Japan, they have these play parks where they put basically, most of the responsibility of cleaning, maintaining these
Mm.
play parks onto the children themselves.
Yeah.
So they try and teach from a very young age that you are responsible for the environment around you.
Mm.
So they have, little child-sized brooms and mops for the kids
Yeah,
to
yeah.
use. And they have poems written around the play areas saying, you as a child, you're responsible for your environment. And it creates this sense of ownership, really, of the space from such an early age, which I think is a beautiful way of enabling communities to feel responsibility for their environments.
Yeah, I like to, it's an investment. Like, I'm investing in
Mm-hmm.
like, what am I invested in here? Like, I want to have this clean because I want to play here. So I'm invested. I need a
Mm.
clean area, so I'm going to clean it up. So
Mm-hmm.
inviting that investment for people to participate, I think that's a really integral part. And the Japanese, I've had a mate that went to the rugby over there, and at the end of the game, they all stayed around and cleaned up the stadium.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah, there
And
you
I've
go.
heard as
Yeah.
well, there's little kids there or little children, when they're starting to go out into the world, they give them yellow hats. So if
Uh-huh.
you see a kid with a yellow hat, you might know that they need help getting to and from wherever. So the community
Right.
knows if there's a kid in a yellow hat, they need to be partially responsible for that,
Mm.
which
Mm.
is a really
It's
respect,
beautiful, isn't it?
yeah, exchange.
Yeah, exactly. It's an exchange of sort of, if you want to be part of society, you
What's
need to
that fabric?
contribute. Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And not just in your own bubble, but
Yeah,
to
yeah.
others who you might not know, you might never have met in your life, but you still have a responsibility towards them, which is a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so, do you have any thoughts or theories on the size of cities? Are we better in 500,000, a million? Like, where does that, as long as they're available, viable infrastructure, like, where is there a sort of level of, oh, this is probably the blueprint for the healthiest and safest society community?
No, I don't think there is necessarily, a golden rule around that. I think when I went to many different cities during my fellowship, I went to both small cities and, really large densities such as Tokyo, for example.
Yeah.
We've got millions of people living in very close proximity. And I felt that there were initiatives in cities which can make it work regardless of size. And as you say, it's a lot to do with equity, infrastructure, public transport, making sure that regardless of where you live or what your demographic is, you still have access to certain parts of the city and to certain infrastructure. infrastructure and amenities within the city. But I certainly found that even in the really dense, large cities, there were still examples of being able to do that really, really well. And I think, I give Tokyo as an example of that, because even within their environment, they had that space for children to feel like, they had their own sort of world that they could
Yeah, yeah.
create. On the other hand, I must say that I did see some bad examples of not doing that.
Yep.
For example, in Hong Kong, when I went to visit there was a lot of paid play infrastructure, which meant that only people that had, that financially were able to, they
Yep.
were sending their children to certain play programs that were paid programs. And you
Yeah.
start seeing a bit of that within cities that don't take it on as a base sort of priority of infrastructure for all. If you don't have that, then you start seeing sort of these things seen as a luxury rather than a human right.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that we noticed. We used to live out in the suburbs. We had a backyard. We lived in a cul-de-sac, and the kids would run
Mm-hmm.
around after school or sort of. But when we moved into the city, we had to pay for after school care because that's where all the kids went to play.
Mm-hmm.
So like it was a play group. No kids are playing in the street because it's of the density. However, they're
Yeah,
all at after school care,
that's right.
which can be quite expensive.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then
Yeah.
you start thinking about the equity of access to these things and making sure that cities take responsibility for, regardless where you live, whether you live out in the suburbs or out in the city, your child has the right to play outdoors for free, not as a paid service, but
Yeah.
as a free service.
Yeah.
And that should be the absolute bare minimum that we provide within our cities.
Yes. Okay. We're coming to the end of our time. So I ask everyone this: what do you do, or what brings you joy in your life that then allows you to on-flow it, fill up your cup? How do you have fun? What do you do to enjoy yourself?
Oh, I love creating things. That's sort of what gives me joy, regardless of what scale that's in. I do a lot of drawing. So whether that's in small scale
Yeah.
drawing or whether it's in a large scale project or development of changing things. I mean, I find great joy in being able to see the shift um, in behavior, but also in people's joys when they see a physical environment or a physical space around them changed over for the better. Um, I find great joy in creating and making things better for everybody. And either through a little drawing or through a larger project, that gives me enormous joy.
That's cool. Thank you for creating. I appreciate it. It's as I said to most people, I could talk about this stuff for hours.
Mm.
So we're on a time limit. So is there anything else that you want to spruik, sell, tell us about um, on this topic of building, designing, constructing safer communities that I feel like we might have missed, or you feel like we may have missed?
I think it's often we leave it up to the higher up people to solve these problems. We leave it up to big master planned communities to get it right. But in reality, there's a lot that we can do as individuals to make our streets and our neighborhoods safer and better for everybody. It might be something as simple as thinking about how you might improve the nature strip on outside your home to make it more friendly, more pleasant for everybody walking
Aesthetically
past,
pleasing?
aesthetically pleasing. Maybe instead of sitting outside in your backyard, you might sit outside on your front porch and create that safer community for everybody. You might think about how the lighting outside your front house works to make it safer at nighttime for everybody. So there are small little things that you can do to improve the livability of the whole community around you that I would really encourage people to think about. How can you improve a tiny little patch to make it better, not just for yourself, but for the people using the threshold of your home?
Yes, weaving the tapestry, if you will.
Exactly, exactly.
Participating in designing and creating safer communities. Now,
Exactly.
thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's helped me to prove my theory that this is, well, a community problem requires a community solution, and the more input and ideas we can get from a variety of sources, the better off. And that, you said it before, like we don't always have to agree
Mm.
either. Like it's around, like, let's work out how we can work this together.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for opening my mind too to issues that often you don't think about. So thanks, Dean.
Thanks for your time. Take care. Bye.